Threshold Station smelled like recycled air, burnt ozone, and the particular desperation that came from too many species crammed into too little space with not enough oversight. Marcus Drake had been waiting in the trading hall for 3 hours, watching his patience evaporate along with his credits, and seriously reconsidering his life choices. "He'll be here," Marcus muttered to himself, checking his chrono for the 15th time. Garvik the Thraxian had never been exactly punctual, but 3 hours late to settle a debt was pushing even his usual standards of unreliability. The debt in question was 30,000 credits, payment for a cargo run that had nearly gotten Marcus killed by pirates, radiation, and at one memorable point, both simultaneously. He needed that money. His ship needed repairs, his license fees were overdue, and his last 3 jobs had barely covered fuel costs. When Garvik finally appeared, pushing through the crowd with his 4 arms gesticulating wildly, Marcus felt his irritation spike into anger. "Drake, my friend, I am so sorry for the delay." "You're not my friend," Marcus interrupted. "Friends don't make other friends wait 3 hours to get paid for honest work. Well, honestish work." Garvik's facial tendrils writhed with what might have been embarrassment or might have been indigestion. Yes, about the payment. There have been some unexpected financial complications." "No." Marcus stood up from the table where he'd been nursing the same drink for hours. "I don't want to hear about complications. I want 30,000 credits transferred to my account. Now. I don't have 30,000 credits." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You don't have the credits," he repeated slowly. "The credits you owe me for a job I completed 5 weeks ago. Those credits. The market has been unpredictable. My investments in Kepler mining stocks. I don't care about your investments." Marcus leaned forward. "I care about getting paid, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to find 30,000 credits from somewhere, sell something, mortgage something, I genuinely don't care what, and you're going to transfer them to me. Or I'm going to file a complaint with the Traders Guild and you'll never work in this sector again." Garvik's tendrils went rigid. "Wait, please, I have an alternative form of payment. Unless it's pure platinum, I'm not interested. Better than platinum, more valuable actually to the right buyer." Garvik leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I have a slave, either-born, very rare, very valuable. I'll transfer ownership to you. She's worth at least 50,000 on the specialty markets." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "I'm not a slaver, Garvik. Neither am I. I acquired her as payment for a debt, same as I'm offering to you. It's just business." Garvik's voice took on a wheedling quality. "If you don't take her, I'll have to sell her to Vexthar. You know what he does with his acquisitions." Marcus did know. Vexthar ran fighting pits in the lower levels, and his treatment of sentient beings made most civilized species physically ill. "This is extortion," Marcus said. "This is business in the frontier," Garvik corrected. "So what will it be? Take the either-born, or walk away with nothing and condemn her to Vexthar's entertainment." Marcus wanted to walk away. Every instinct told him that accepting a slave was crossing a line he'd never be able to uncross. But 30,000 credits was the difference between staying in business and selling the wandering star for scrap. And if he walked away, whoever this either-born was would end up somewhere infinitely worse. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like ash. "Transfer the ownership codes, but this clears your debt completely. We're done after this." Of course. "You won't regret this, Drake. She's very well behaved, no trouble at all." Marcus stopped listening. He was already regretting it. The holding cells were 3 levels down, in a section of the station where environmental controls were more suggestion than guarantee. Garvik led him through corridors that reeked of industrial cleaner and despair, past cells holding various species in various states of misery. They stopped at cell 47. Garvik pressed his palm to the scanner, and the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. She was sitting on the floor in the corner, knees drawn up to her chest, and Marcus's first thought was that she looked like a ghost. Her skin had a luminescent quality, pale as starlight, and her features were delicate in a way that seemed almost fragile. Her ears were long, sweeping back from her head in elegant curves that marked her unmistakably as either-born. She was also covered in scars, some old and faded, some newer, and there was a hollow quality to her eyes that spoke of suffering that had become routine. "This is her," Garvik said cheerfully, as if presenting a prize. "Prime specimen, very docile. I call her Lyra because she won't speak her real name. The ownership transfer is processing now." Marcus's neural implant pinged, confirming the transfer. He was now, legally and officially, the owner of another sentient being. "Get up," Garvik commanded. The woman rose smoothly, mechanically, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. "She follows basic commands, but I haven't activated the full compliance protocols. Thought you might want to configure those yourself." "I'm not going to," Marcus stopped, swallowed his anger. "Just leave. Our business is done." Garvik shrugged and departed, leaving Marcus alone with a person he owned and didn't want. "Look," Marcus said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. I'm not going to hurt you. This isn't what I wanted, but it's what happened, and now I need to figure out what to do about it." The woman, Lyra, didn't respond, didn't even look at him. "Can you understand me?" A slight nod, progress maybe, okay. "I'm Marcus Drake. I have a ship docked at Bay 17. We're going to go there and then, I don't know, we'll figure something out." He turned toward the door, then stopped when he realized she wasn't following. "You can walk beside me." "You don't have to." He gestured vaguely at the 3 paces behind him that slave protocols typically enforced. She moved to walk beside him, then seemed to reconsider and dropped back to the traditional following distance. It made Marcus feel sick. They made their way through the station in silence. Marcus was hyper-aware of the looks they drew. A human with an either-born slave wasn't exactly common, but it wasn't rare enough to be shocking. Just another transaction in the lawless frontier where morality was negotiable and survival wasn't. The wandering star was waiting in her assigned bay, looking as worn and reliable as ever. Marcus had owned her for 8 years, and they'd developed the kind of relationship where mutual disappointment was balanced by stubborn loyalty. "Home," he said, more to himself than to Lyra. "Such as it is." He led her aboard through the cargo bay and up to the crew deck. The spare quarters were small but functional, a bed, a storage locker, a small hygiene station. Marcus had used them maybe twice in 8 years. "This is yours," he said, "for now, until we figure out what to do." Lyra stepped into the room and stood perfectly still, as if waiting for further instructions. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhausted and overwhelmed. "I'm going to deactivate the slave protocols. The ones that let me compel you to obey commands. I'm not going to use them, so there's no point in having them active." He pulled up the ownership interface through his neural implant and disabled every compliance protocol he could find. It took 15 minutes of navigating menus that made him progressively more disgusted with galactic society. "There," he said when it was done. "You don't have to follow my orders anymore. You can make your own choices." Lyra looked at him for the first time since they'd left Threshold Station. Her eyes were violet, striking against her pale skin, and they held an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was soft, unused. "Because owning people is wrong," Marcus said simply. "And I might be a lot of things, but I'd like to think I'm not that." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned away and sat on the floor in the corner of the room, ignoring the bed entirely. Marcus left her there, retreating to the cockpit where he could pretend he had any idea what he was doing. The next 3 days established a routine that was uncomfortable for everyone involved. Lyra stayed in her quarters most of the time, emerging only when Marcus explicitly told her it was okay to use the galley or hygiene facilities. She ate sparingly and only when instructed. She spoke rarely and only in response to direct questions. Marcus tried treating her like crew rather than property, but she didn't seem to know how to respond to that. When he asked if she wanted something to eat, she stared at him blankly until he phrased it as a command. When he suggested she might be more comfortable sleeping in the bed, she ignored the suggestion completely. It was maddening and heartbreaking in equal measure. To distract himself, Marcus researched the Etherborn during the long hours of hyperspace travel. What he found was fragments of a history that felt more like mythology. The Etherborn Confederation had ruled 47 star systems at its height, maintaining power through technological superiority and cultural influence rather than military might. They were artists, philosophers, engineers who'd built wonders that still defied modern understanding. Then came the Sundering. The records were vague on details, but approximately 80 years ago, the Confederation had collapsed in what was officially called a civil war. The Etherborn homeworlds went silent. Survivors scattered across the galaxy, most ending up as slaves because their distinctive features made them valuable to collectors. It was a depressing end to what had been, by all accounts, a genuinely impressive civilization. On the fourth night, Marcus woke to find his ship's course had been altered. He rushed to the cockpit, expecting a malfunction, and found Lyra standing at the navigation console, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced confidence. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, there was something sharp in her expression. "This route passes through the Kessler Belt. There are pirates there. You'll be killed." "The official charts say this is the safest route to Orina Station." "The official charts are wrong." She pointed to a region of space marked in red on the display. "This way, through the unmarked jump point. It adds 6 hours to the journey, but avoids the ambush." "How do you know there's an ambush?" "Because I recognize the pattern. This is how they operate in this sector." Marcus studied her face, trying to gauge if this was some kind of trick. But her expression was serious, certain, and something in his gut told him to trust her. "Fine," he said. "We'll try your route, but if we end up in worse trouble." "We won't." She was right. 6 hours later, when they emerged from hyperspace at Orina Station, Marcus checked the comm channels and learned that 3 ships had been attacked and destroyed in the Kessler Belt that morning. Ships that had followed the official safe route. He found Lyra in the galley, staring at a cup of water like it might hold answers. "You saved us," he said. She didn't look up. "I repaid a debt. You disabled the compliance protocols. I provided useful information in return." "It's not a transaction. You don't owe me anything." "Everyone owes something." Marcus sat down across from her, and that's when he noticed them. Intricate symbols etched into her skin, running along her forearms and disappearing under the sleeves of her shirt. They were precise, deliberate, and in the dim light of the galley they seemed to glow faintly with their own luminescence. "What are those?" he asked, gesturing to the markings. Lyra pulled her sleeves down quickly, covering them. "Nothing, scars." But they weren't scars. Marcus had seen enough scars to know the difference. These were something else entirely, something important that she was hiding. He didn't push, but as he returned to the cockpit and prepared for docking procedures, Marcus felt the first stirrings of a suspicion that Lyra wasn't just a random Etherborn slave. She was something more, something that people had gone to great lengths to conceal. And Marcus Drake, who'd only wanted to collect a debt and move on with his life, was now responsible for protecting a secret he didn't yet understand. Outside the viewports, Orina Station grew larger, its lights promising safety and commerce and the illusion of civilization. Inside the wandering star, a human trader and an alien mystery circled each other warily, both aware that something significant had shifted but neither quite ready to acknowledge what. The galaxy continued turning, indifferent to the small dramas playing out aboard countless ships. But in the spare crew quarters, Lyra sat in darkness and let the markings on her skin glow freely, remembering who she'd been before slavery tried to erase her. And in the cockpit, Marcus Drake made a decision. He was going to figure out exactly who Lyra was, because people didn't navigate hyperspace routes with that level of expertise by accident, and those symbols meant something. He just had to figure out what. The research consumed Marcus's nights. While Lyra slept, or didn't sleep, he suspected she spent most nights sitting in her corner, waiting for morning. Marcus dug through databases both legitimate and decidedly less so. Cross-referencing Etherborn cultural markers, searching for anything that matched the symbols he'd glimpsed on her skin. Most of what he found was useless. Academic papers on either-born aesthetics that focused on their architectural style. Anthropological studies that had been rendered obsolete by the sundering. Black market collector guides that made his stomach turn with their clinical descriptions of how to properly maintain either-born slaves. Then, during their 5th day of travel toward the outer reach colonies where Marcus had a cargo pickup scheduled, he found it. The file was buried in a restricted archaeological database that Marcus accessed through a contact who owed him favors and didn't ask too many questions. It was a study on either-born royal genealogy, specifically the practice of marking imperial family members with nanotechnology tattoos that served as both identification and authentication. The symbols in the research file matched the ones on Lyra's skin exactly. Marcus stared at the display for a full minute, his mind refusing to process the implications. Then he read the file again, more carefully, paying attention to the details he'd skipped the first time. The markings were unique to each individual, encoding their lineage, birth order, and succession rights in a form that was impossible to forge or remove. They were applied at birth using nanotechnology that integrated with the recipient's cellular structure. And according to the file, there were only 17 confirmed sets of these markings in existence, belonging to the last ruling family of the either-born confederation. 16 of those 17 individuals were confirmed dead, killed during the sundering. The 17th was listed as missing, presumed dead, youngest daughter of Emperor Morvan Eth Sorving, age at time of disappearance, 8 standard years. Her name, Lyrian Eth Morvana. Marcus sat back in his chair, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. The woman in his spare crew quarters wasn't just a random slave. She was royalty. Heir to an empire that had been deliberately destroyed to prevent anyone from doing exactly what Marcus now had the power to do, restore her. He should have felt excitement. This was the kind of discovery that could make him rich beyond imagination. There were either-born loyalist groups who would pay fortunes for a legitimate heir. Intelligence agencies that would pay even more to keep her hidden. Collectors who would. Marcus stopped that thought before it could complete. He'd seen what collectors did. He found Lyra in the observation deck, a small space with a viewport that showed the stars streaming past as they traveled through hyperspace. She was sitting on the floor as usual, staring out at the infinite. "Your real name is Lyrian," Marcus said without preamble. She went perfectly still. Not the mechanical stillness of slave conditioning, but the frozen alertness of prey that's just spotted a predator. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "About 6 minutes." Marcus leaned against the wall, deliberately keeping his distance. "I found a file, archaeological records about either-born royal markings. The symbols on your skin, they're not scars." No, her voice was barely audible. "They're not. You're the last heir to the either-born confederation. I'm the heir to ashes and memory. The confederation is dead." Marcus slid down the wall to sit on the floor, maintaining the distance between them. "What happened? The files I found were vague about the sundering. They called it a civil war, but it wasn't a civil war." Lyrian's hands clenched in her lap. "It was a coup. My uncle, Lord Vecthar, believed the Confederation had grown weak, that our focus on culture and diplomacy made us vulnerable. He wanted to transform us into a military empire." She took a shuddering breath. "My father refused, so Vecthar killed him, killed my mother, my brothers, my sisters, destroyed the homeworld's infrastructure so thoroughly that no one could ever use them as a power base again. He scattered our people across the galaxy, turned them into slaves and refugees, because a species without a home can't organize resistance. But you survived. One of my father's guards smuggled me off-world, got me to the outer colonies. He planned to hide me until I was old enough to reclaim my inheritance." Her laugh was bitter. "He died protecting me from slavers. I was 11, been moving between owners ever since. 15 years of learning that my royal blood was worth exactly as much as someone was willing to pay for it." Marcus processed this, trying to reconcile the traumatized woman in front of him with the child princess who'd watched her empire burn. Garvik didn't know, Lyrian continued, what the markings meant. Most people don't. The knowledge died with my family. He just thought they were decorative scarring, made me more valuable to certain buyers. But you knew what they meant. You've known this whole time who you are. I know who I was. That girl died in the fires of the Sundering. What I am now. She finally turned to look at him, and her violet eyes were filled with something that might have been challenge or might have been despair. What will you do with me now, Marcus Drake? Now that you know I'm worth more than 30,000 credits? It was the question he'd been dreading. Because she was right. The information he now possessed had immense value. He could sell it, leverage it, use it to change his life completely. He thought about the compliance protocols he'd disabled, about the way she'd saved them from the pirate ambush, about the hollow look in her eyes when she'd first seen him in that cell on Threshold Station. Her expression shifted, surprise, disbelief. You're lying. I'm really not. Look, I'm not a good person. I run gray market cargo, I've broken more regulations than I can count, and I've made plenty of decisions I'm not proud of. But I'm not going to sell you or trade you or use you as leverage. You're not property. I am legally your property. The ownership transfer is valid under. I don't care what's legal. I care what's right, and selling people is wrong. He stood up, offering her a hand. So here's what I'm thinking. There must be ether-born communities out in the outer sectors, right? Places where your people gathered after the Sundering. I could help you get there. Help you connect with. No. Lyrian didn't take his hand. You don't understand. There's nothing to connect with. The ether-born are scattered, leaderless, and after 80 years most have given up hope of anything better. I am the heir to a dead empire. There is nothing left to restore. But even as she said it, Marcus saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something that might have been hope or might have been the memory of what hope once felt like. Maybe, he said carefully. Or maybe you're the heir to something that could be rebuilt. Different than it was, sure, but still something. Lyrian stood without taking his hand, moving with the unconscious grace that betrayed her royal training. You don't know what you're saying. Rebuilding would require resources, political capital, allies. It would require someone willing to try, Marcus interrupted, and someone willing to help them. I'm not saying it would be easy. I'm not even saying it would work. But walking away and pretending you're nobody seems like a waste of a perfectly good heir. For a long moment, they stood in the observation deck, the stars streaming past behind them, two people from different worlds trying to figure out if the impossible might somehow be achievable. Why, Lyrian asked finally, why would you help me? What do you gain? Marcus considered the question seriously. Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe I'm tired of just surviving. Maybe I want to do something that actually matters. Or maybe I just can't stomach the idea of walking away when I could help. He smiled slightly. My sister always said I had a terrible habit of making problems my responsibility when I should just mind my own business. Guess she was right. Lyrian's expression softened just fractionally. Your sister sounds wise. She is. Which is why she stopped talking to me 3 years ago when I refused to quit the frontier trade and get a respectable job. Marcus shrugged. But that's beside the point. The point is, do you want to try to see if there's anything left worth rebuilding? I don't know how. Neither do I, but we can figure it out together. That's what partnerships are for. Lyrian looked at him with those violet eyes that had seen too much suffering, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she almost smiled. Partnership, she repeated, testing the word. Not ownership. Never ownership. She extended her hand and Marcus took it. Her grip was firm and the markings on her forearm glowed faintly in the dim light. Then let's begin, Lyrian said. Though I should warn you, if we're going to do this properly, there's a place we'll need to go. A place that most people believe no longer exists. Where? The archive world, where the Etherborn kept our most important cultural records and technological secrets. If it survived the Sundering, and if we can reach it, it might give us a foundation to build from. And if it didn't survive, then we'll have taken a dangerous journey for nothing, and you'll have confirmation that I'm exactly what I said. The heir to ashes and memory. Marcus grinned. Well, I've taken dangerous journeys for less compelling reasons. Let's do it. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their endless dance, and somewhere in that vast darkness, the remnants of a fallen empire waited to see if hope could be reborn from ruins. Inside the wandering star, a human trader and an alien heir shook hands on a partnership that made no logical sense and probably wouldn't work. But sometimes, the best things in the universe were the ones that defied logic and worked anyway. The route to the archive world required navigating through territory controlled by Aetherborn factions still loyal to Lord Vecthar, the uncle who'd orchestrated the Sundering, and spent 80 years hunting down any surviving royals who might threaten his power. He doesn't rule openly, Lyrian explained as they plotted their course. After the Sundering, he realized that maintaining control through fear and fragmentation was more effective than trying to rebuild the empire under his banner. He keeps the Aetherborn scattered, leaderless, and he eliminates anyone who might unite them. Sounds like a great guy, Marcus said. Really warm personality. Lyrian's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. His agents are everywhere. If they learn I'm alive, if they discover what we're attempting, they'll kill us both. Then we'll make sure they don't learn. Marcus pulled up a star chart, studying the unmarked routes that smugglers and pirates use to avoid official detection. I've spent 8 years running cargo through places I wasn't supposed to be. Avoiding people who wanted me dead is kind of my specialty. They departed from Orina Station under false manifests, the wandering star listed as carrying agricultural equipment to the mining colonies. Marcus had learned long ago that boring cargo attracted less attention than anything interesting. The first 3 days passed without incident. They traveled through established hyperspace lanes, 2 ships among thousands, unremarkable and unmemorable. Lyrian spent most of her time studying the navigation charts, occasionally pointing out routes that were safer than the ones Marcus had planned. "You're good at this," he observed on the 4th day. Watching her adjust their trajectory to avoid a patrol route she somehow knew about despite it not appearing on any official charts. "I was trained by the best navigators in the Confederation," she said absently, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Before the Sundering, I was supposed to command my own diplomatic vessel when I came of age. My father believed all royals should understand how to pilot ships personally. It was the first time she'd volunteered information about her past without being asked. Marcus took it as progress. What else were you trained in? Languages, diplomatic protocol, xenobiology and cultural studies, combat arts both armed and unarmed, philosophy and ethics, art appreciation, quantum mechanics and stellar cartography." She paused. "It seems excessive now, but the assumption was that I'd have a lifetime to use those skills in service to our people. 15 years in slavery didn't erase what you learned. No. But it taught me that knowledge without power is just a reminder of what you've lost." She turned to face him. "Why do you keep asking about my past? Because you're more than what was done to you, and I think you need to remember that." Lyrian held his gaze for a moment, something shifting in her expression. Then alarms blared throughout the ship. "Multiple contacts," Marcus said, pulling up the tactical display. 3 ships converging on our position. They just dropped out of hyperspace. Pirates." Lyrian moved to the weapons console with practiced ease. "Pirates don't travel in coordinated formations like that." Marcus's hands flew across the controls trying to calculate an escape route. "Those are hunter-killer ships. Someone sent them specifically for us. Vecthar's agents." Lyrian's voice was flat. "They found us." The first ship opened fire, pulse weapons tearing through space where the wandering star had been seconds earlier. Marcus threw the ship into an evasive pattern, pushing the engines harder than was probably safe. "Can we outrun them?" Lyrian asked. "Not for long, they're faster and better armed." Marcus checked their position. "But there's an asteroid field about 6 minutes from here. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the debris. Or get crushed by asteroids. I'm open to better suggestions." Lyrian studied the tactical display, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "There, that cluster of asteroids has metallic composition. If we can position ourselves correctly, it'll interfere with their targeting systems. That's also going to interfere with our shields. Then don't get hit. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that reminded Marcus she'd been trained for situations exactly like this. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Marcus did trust her, which was probably going to get him killed. He adjusted course toward the metallic asteroid cluster while Lyrian configured their shields for maximum maneuverability instead of protection. The hunter-killer ships followed, their pulse weapons carving lines of destruction through space. One blast clipped the Wandering Star's port engine, and alarms screamed warnings about hull integrity. They hit the asteroid field at speeds that made Marcus's teeth ache. Rock and metal flashed past the viewports in a deadly blur. The pursuing ships slowed slightly, but they were still coming. Now, Lyrian said calmly. Hard to starboard, then cut all power except life support. That's insane. Do it. Marcus did it. The Wandering Star spun hard to starboard, then went dark, momentum carrying them deeper into the metallic asteroid cluster. Without power, they were invisible to most scanner types, just another piece of debris among thousands. The hunter-killer ships swept past, their sensors confused by the metallic interference, searching for a power signature that no longer existed. They waited in the darkness for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Finally, the enemy ships gave up and jumped back into hyperspace, presumably to search other locations. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was effective, Lyrian finished. Though your ship took damage, how bad? Marcus ran diagnostics. Port engine is at 60%. We've got hull breaches in the cargo bay. Life support is fine, but we're going to need repairs before we can reach the archive world. There's a station, not on the official charts. Lyrian pulled up a navigation display and indicated a location deep in unmarked space. It's maintained by Aetherborn refugees. They'll help us. You sure about that? No, but it's our best option. The station appeared 3 days later, materializing out of the darkness like a ghost. It was ancient by galactic standards, its design unmistakably Aetherborn. Flowing lines and elegant architecture that managed to be both functional and beautiful. As they approached, Marcus received a hail in a language his translator struggled with before rendering it as formal Aetherborn. Unknown vessel, identify yourself and state your purpose. Lyrian touched the communication console, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority Marcus had never heard from her before. She spoke in her native language, the words flowing like music, and as she spoke, she pulled back her sleeve to show the markings on her forearm to the visual scanner. The response was immediate. The station's defensive weapons powered down and the docking bay doors opened in welcome. What did you tell them? Marcus asked. The truth, that the last daughter of the royal house requests aid and shelter. She paused. And that I travel with a human ally who has proven worthy of trust. They docked in a bay that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A reception party was waiting, 7 Aetherborn, their expressions a mixture of hope, disbelief, and wariness. The oldest among them, a woman whose long ears were decorated with silver threading that indicated some kind of rank, stepped forward. When she saw Lyrian clearly, when she saw the markings that glowed faintly in the station's light, she dropped to one knee. The others followed immediately. Highness, the woman said in standard, presumably for Marcus's benefit, we never thought, we'd given up hope of ever seeing royal markings again. Lyrian looked overwhelmed, uncertain. Marcus stepped beside her, not in front but beside, showing support without taking control. Rise, Lyrian said softly. Please, I'm not. I don't have a court or a kingdom, I'm just... You're our heir, the woman said, standing. I am Tessa Eth Voren, former captain of the Imperial Guard. These are others who escaped the Sundering and have been waiting here, preserving what we could, hoping that someday someone with the authority to lead would return. She gestured to the station around them. This is one of 3 archive stations that survived. We've maintained it for 80 years, kept the records safe, kept the knowledge alive. For you, for whoever might come. Lyrian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to be what you need. I was 8 when the Empire fell. I've spent most of my life as a slave. I don't know how to lead. None of us knew how to survive when our worlds burned, Tessa said gently. But we learned. You'll learn too, and you won't be alone. She turned to Marcus, studying him with sharp eyes. You're the human who carries her ownership codes. Not anymore, Marcus said firmly. I disabled them. She's free to make her own choices. And yet you travel together. Why? Because she asked me to help, and because walking away when someone needs help isn't something I can do. Tessa smiled slightly. Humanity has a reputation for stubbornness. I'm beginning to see why. She looked back at Lyrian. Come, let me show you what we've preserved, and then we can discuss what comes next. The archives were beyond anything Marcus had imagined. Vast chambers filled with data storage, cultural artifacts, technological schematics, the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had spanned 47 star systems. Tessa explained that they'd spent decades organizing everything, cross-referencing, ensuring that nothing was lost. We hoped, she said, that someday someone would come who could use this knowledge to rebuild. That night, while Lyrian pored over historical records with Tessa and the other archivists, Marcus found himself in the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars and trying to process how drastically his life had changed in 3 weeks. He'd accepted a slave to settle a debt. Now he was part of a conspiracy to rebuild a fallen empire. Regretting your choices, Marcus turned to find Lyrian standing in the doorway. She looked different, still weary, still carrying the scars of 15 years in slavery. But there was something else now. A straightness to her posture, a clarity in her eyes. Just processing them, he said. This is a lot bigger than I thought it would be. You can leave. No one would blame you. This isn't your fight. Actually, I think it is now. Marcus gestured to the station around them. These people have been waiting 80 years for hope. For someone who could give them a reason to believe rebuilding is possible. That's you. And if you're going to do this, you'll need help from people who aren't either born. People who can navigate the broader galaxy, who can make connections your people can't. People like you. Traders, smugglers, people who operate in the spaces between official channels. Yeah, people like me. He smiled. Besides, I'm invested now. I want to see how this turns out. Lyrian moved to stand beside him at the viewport. Tessa thinks we should make our presence known. Start reaching out to either-born communities, offer them a choice to join us. Begin the process of restoration. That'll put a target on your back the size of a star. The target was always there. Vecthar won't stop hunting me just because I'm hiding. Her reflection in the viewport showed determination. But if I'm going to be hunted anyway, I'd rather it be for trying to rebuild than for simply surviving. Then we'd better make sure you survive long enough to do the rebuilding. Marcus turned to face her directly. I have contacts. People who owe me favors, people who can spread information through unofficial channels. We can get the word out carefully, build a network before we make any public moves. That could take years. Probably. Rebuilding an empire isn't exactly a quick process. He extended his hand, but I'm in for the long term if you are. Lyrian took his hand, and this time her grip was firm, confident. Partnership, she said, for however long it takes. Over the following weeks, plans took shape. Tessa and her team had maintained contact with other either-born refugee groups scattered across the galaxy, a network of survivors who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Messages were sent through secure channels, carefully worded invitations to those who might be willing to join a restoration effort. Marcus leveraged his contacts in the smuggling community, establishing supply lines and information networks that operated outside official scrutiny. It turned out that frontier traders were remarkably willing to help when the cause was interesting and the pay was decent. The first new arrivals came 3 weeks after Marcus and Lyrian reached the archive station. A family of 4 who'd been living as indentured workers on an agricultural colony. Then a group of 7 who'd pooled their resources to buy their freedom. Then more, in 1s and 2s and small groups, either-born who'd heard that the royal heir had returned and wanted to be part of whatever came next. With each arrival, Lyrian grew more confident. She wasn't the traumatized slave Marcus had first met in that holding cell. She was becoming something else, a leader finding her voice, an heir learning to carry the weight of her lineage. The assassination attempt came on the 32nd day. Marcus was in the docking bay, overseeing repairs to the Wandering Star, when the alarm sounded. He grabbed his sidearm and ran toward the command center, where Lyrian had been meeting with newly arrived refugees. He found chaos. Two infiltrators wearing adaptive camouflage suits, their weapons drawn, moving toward Lyrian with lethal intent. Tessa and 3 guards were down, injured but alive. Marcus didn't think. He fired, hitting one infiltrator in the shoulder. The figure spun, weapon tracking toward Marcus, but Lyrian moved. She moved with the speed and precision of someone trained in combat since childhood, someone who'd never forgotten those lessons even through years of slavery. She disarmed the second infiltrator with a strike that broke bones, then used the stolen weapon to eliminate the first before they could fire. It was over in seconds. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, reaching her side. "No." But Tessa, Lyrian dropped to her knees beside the fallen guard captain. The wound was serious but not immediately fatal. "Medical team!" Marcus shouted, and personnel responded immediately, taking Tessa away for treatment. The 2 infiltrators were restrained and interrogated. They confirmed what everyone had suspected. Vekthar had learned of Lyrian's survival and location. More assassins would come. This was only the beginning. That night the core group gathered in the command center. Lyrian, Marcus, Tessa, against medical advice, and 3 others who'd emerged as natural leaders among the refugees. "We can't stay here," one of them said. "If Vekthar knows where we are, then we make staying here more dangerous for him than it is for us," Lyrian interrupted. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We've been hiding for 80 years, running, scattered. That's what he wants. That's how he maintains control. You're suggesting we stand and fight?" Tessa asked. "We have maybe 200 people here. Vekthar commands resources across a dozen sectors. I'm suggesting we stop behaving like refugees and start behaving like an empire in restoration." Lyrian stood, and in that moment, Marcus saw the princess she'd been meant to become. "We have knowledge, technology, and something Vekthar doesn't have. Legitimacy. I am the rightful heir. The markings prove it. Every Etherborn who sees them knows it." She looked around the room. "We can't match Vekthar's military strength. Not yet, but we can offer our people something he can't: hope, a future, a reason to believe that we're more than scattered survivors of a dead empire." "How?" Marcus asked, though he thought he knew where this was going. "We go public. We announce my survival. We invite every Etherborn in the galaxy to choose. Continue living in the shadows of a fallen civilization, or join us in building something new." The room erupted in debate. It was dangerous. It was premature. It would make them targets. But it would also force Vekthar to act openly instead of through assassins, and it would give the scattered Etherborn something they'd lacked for 80 years, a rallying point. The debate lasted 3 hours. In the end, they voted to proceed. Marcus spent the next week preparing. He contacted every journalist, information broker, and communications specialist he knew. Built a network that could disseminate Lyrian's message across the galaxy simultaneously, too broad for Vekthar to suppress. When the day came, Lyrian stood before a camera, wearing simple clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable authority. The markings on her skin glowed softly in the light. She spoke in Etherborn first, then in Standard, and Marcus's contacts ensured the message reached every corner of civilized space. "I am Lyrian Eth Morvana, last daughter of the royal house, heir to the Etherborn Confederation. 80 years ago, my family was murdered and our civilization was shattered. I survived, and I am here to offer our people a choice. We can continue as we have been, scattered, powerless, enslaved to others' purposes. Or we can remember what we were and build something new from the ashes. Not the empire that fell, but something better. Something that learns from our mistakes and honors our strengths. I don't ask you to follow me blindly. I don't promise easy victories or quick solutions. But I promise that if you join us, you'll be part of something that matters. Something worth fighting for. To my uncle Vekthar, who thought he could erase our legacy by scattering our people, you failed. We remember, and we're coming home." The message went viral within hours. Responses flooded in from Etherborn across the galaxy, some pledging support, some expressing skepticism, some asking questions that would take months to answer. But the conversation had begun. Vekthar's response came 3 days later. A formal challenge broadcast on the same networks Lyrian had used. He denied her legitimacy, called the markings forgeries, and declared that any Etherborn who joined her rebellion would be considered traitors. It was exactly the reaction Lyrian had predicted. By responding publicly, Vekthar had acknowledged her as a threat. By calling her a rebel, he'd implicitly confirmed that she had a claim worth rebelling against. The political maneuvering that followed was complex and exhausting. Lyrian proved to be a natural diplomat, navigating between different Etherborn factions with grace, while Marcus worked his contacts to build alliances with sympathetic human and alien governments. More Etherborn arrived at the archive station, hundreds, then thousands. They had to establish additional settlements on nearby planets, had to create governance structures, supply lines, defensive systems. It was messy and complicated and required compromises that satisfied no one completely. But it was working. 6 months after Lyrian's broadcast, they controlled 3-star systems. Not through conquest, but through Etherborn choosing to join them, bringing their skills and resources, believing that restoration was possible. Vekthar's power began to crack. His authority had always been maintained through fear and the absence of alternatives. Now there was an alternative, and his supporters began quietly switching sides. The final confrontation came not through battle but through defection. One of Vekthar's key military commanders, convinced by Lyrian's message and swayed by the legitimacy of her markings, brought his entire fleet to her cause. Faced with collapsing support, and the reality that the Etherborn people were choosing restoration over his fragmented rule, Vekthar attempted one last assassination. He came personally, leading a strike team to the archive station. Marcus and Lyrian fought side by side against attackers who'd underestimated both the human trader's frontier-hardened reflexes and the princess's combat training. When it was over, Vekthar was captured, and the attempted assassination had been broadcast live across the networks. Any remaining legitimacy he'd claimed evaporated in the face of that desperate, violent act. The Etherborn people made their choice. Not unanimously, nothing in politics ever is, but decisively. Lyrian was recognized as the rightful heir, and the process of true restoration began. 1 year after Marcus had reluctantly accepted a slave as payment for a debt, he stood on the balcony of what was being called the Provisional Imperial Palace, a repurposed station that would serve until they could build something permanent, and watched ships arriving and departing, each one carrying Etherborn who'd chosen to come home. "Regretting your choices yet?" Lyrian asked, joining him at the railing. "You keep asking me that. You keep ending up in situations that should make you regret them." Marcus smiled. "I regret a lot of things. Taking that debt payment isn't one of them." Lyrian leaned against the railing beside him. She'd changed over the past year, still carried scars, still had nightmares, but there was strength there that slavery had tried to break and failed. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said quietly. "When I was in that cell on Threshold Station, I'd given up hope of ever being anything more than property. You showed me that humanity's strength isn't in power or conquest. It's in choosing compassion when cruelty would be easier, in helping when walking away would be safer. I just paid a debt and got in over my head. You did more than that. You gave an empire its future back." She took his hand. "And you gave me mine." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "So what now? You've got an empire to rebuild. That's going to take decades. Centuries, probably. We made a lot of mistakes the first time. Trying to avoid repeating them while building something new, it's complicated. Good thing you've got help. Good thing I've got you." She smiled. "I know you're a trader, not a diplomat. But I could use someone who understands how the frontier works. Someone who can navigate the spaces between official channels. Someone I trust completely. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. For however long you're willing to stay." Marcus looked out at the ships,